everybody, welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. Today's kind of an exciting one for me because I'm switching it up a little bit. I've decided that I'm going to do kind of rotate between Philip K. Dick and other writers. So I think the first thing that I'm going to try to tackle is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. So this is an Asimov video, which is totally cool. I chose I, Robot to start with. Number one, because I've read it before. Before the film came out, I read the book. This is the copy, my incredible copy of I, Robot. Right? Before the film came out, I went out and bought this and I read the thing. And I enjoyed it. It's all right. Of course, the movie was nothing like this book, right? This book is a collection of short stories that have been strung together, whereas that movie was trying to be its own thing. And I enjoyed the film. It was okay. I really like robots. That's I don't know why. I just really love the idea of them. I really enjoy them. So that's where I first encountered the book. And I read it then. I forgot 99% of it, of course. I'm not much of a reader. But I've decided I'm going to start reading it again. So I read the first story, which is called Robbie. Now, also, I do need to tell you, there's an introduction in this book. And like any person who's not really a reader, I always just skip the introduction. But in this case, I thought, no, we're doing the channel. I got to read the introduction. And I'm really glad that I did, because I always thought that introductions were just some other person talking about the book or whatever. But this one is just more story. It's its own little story. So technically I sort of read two stories for this, but yeah, as I learned, this is a fix-up novel, right? These stories were not written to be put together. They were just written one after another to be published in magazines for money. But then later, they were successful enough that they thought we should create a book that's the stories, and maybe we should have something that ties them all together, right? So this introduction is by Isaac Asimov, and it's this little goofy story of this reporter who is trying to write a piece on a very important worker at a robot factory. A person that has been working for the factory for the last 50 years or so. She's about to retire, and he wants to do a story on her. But he wants the human angle, right? He wants the inside scoop. He wants to know all of her little cool stories about working in the industry and working at the most successful robot company ever. So each of the stories in here is her relaying a fascinating piece of her life to the reporter. Now, she's not in all these stories, but okay, we're going to talk about iRobot for a tiny bit. iRobot, I think, was first published in 1949. Okay? All of these stories, starting with Robbie, I think they might be in order in here. The first two are definitely in order that he wrote them in. So Robbie was the first robot story that he wrote. And actually, kind of a funny thing I learned, another science fiction writer that he liked had written a story called I, Robot. And he read the story and he loved it, and he decided that he was going to write robot stories too. So that's why he wrote Robbie, because he was inspired by, this guy's name's Otto, I think. I can't remember his last name, Benson or something. But it was called iRobot. And then when they decided to publish this collection, he didn't want to call it iRobot. He wanted to call it like Steel and Brains or something like that. But the publisher decided to call it iRobot, and he never liked the title because he didn't want to rip off this other writer's title. So he wasn't happy with the title, but he was happy that they did the book. And to tie that back, when they first published Robbie, They called it Strange Friend or something like that, which also Asimov didn't like at all because it gave kind of the wrong impression, I think, about Robbie. It was sort of from the point of view of the outsiders, not the point of view of the little girl who plays with Robbie. So yeah, that it's kind of funny how he never liked the names. He never got to name his stuff, I guess. They were always playing with the names. Um, so, I, Robot, published in 49, but the crazy thing is there's a 1950 rewrite. So, if you look up Robbie on, say, Wikipedia, they're going to have the original version, and then it might list all of the changes that were made for the 1950 version. Now, I don't know if that means that iRobot was actually published in 50 and they were rewritten for iRobot, which would make good sense to me, or if it means that there was a version of iRobot that's just the short stories and then 1 year later they published it again and made it a fix-up novel. I don't know. I'm not sure. But one of the major changes, of course, from the 1940 version of Robbie to the 1950 version of Robbie in iRobot is Asimov put that old woman who works in the robot factory in the fix-up story, he put her into Robbie. So she's a young woman in Robbie, and she observes the little girl asking the robot where her friend Robbie is, and the robot getting fried because it can't handle those type of questions. And it helps her write her psychology on robots paper that helps her get hired at the robot factory. Okay, so he's working her into the stories. Now, they did kind of a nice thing. Anytime that they talk about her in Robbie, they put it in parentheses, which I think is there simply to show that this was not in the original book. Now, there's lots of changes that they didn't put in parentheses. I read that in the 1940 version, the Robbie is set in 1983. But in the 1950 version, which is this version, it's set in 1996. So he pushed up the date to make it further in the future, after 10 years, I guess, from the original publication of Robbie to the publication of iRobot. I think he realized that we may not be progressing as fast as we were hoping to, with robotics especially. Yeah, robotics is a weird... I'm going to get into that in a minute. So there's a lot of differences in this because it's a fix-up novel compared to the original stuff. Another big important thing is the first time that the 3 laws of robots is really laid out is in a story called Roundabout, which is this... Not Roundabout, I'm sorry. Runaround, which is the second story in iRobot, and it's also the story that he wrote after Robbie. That's when he defines the 3 laws. But in the 1950 version of Robbie, he put in the first law of robotics. So in my version, it looks like Robbie is where the 3 laws of robotics is really created, but in reality, it doesn't really get created until Runaround, which is the second story. Okay, so interesting, weird stuff about iRobot. That's cool. So now let's talk about Isaac Asimov a little bit. Isaac Asimov wrote all kinds of stories. I mean, over 500 novels. Like, he is incredibly prolific. Hundreds of short stories, tons of letters. Like, he's a writer. So, like, literally there's a story on the Wikipedia under him I was reading that if you look at the the Dewey Decimal System, I think is what it's called, the way that libraries organize books. They have 100 different categories for types of books, right? So if you write a science fiction book, that'll be, let's say, 950 to 1100, right? You're going to be within those numbers, I guess. They have categories within that massive system. Isaac Asimov has books in 99 of the 100 categories. And the 100th category, which is philosophy and psychology, he has several essays that he's written, even though there wasn't a full book put together of them that would go in 100. And he's also written introductions for many, many books that are in the 100th category. So he's in all 100 categories. Like, this guy's insane as a writer. He started with science fiction. He fell in love with science fiction as a child. He was born in Russia, which is totally cool. I really love the Russian people. I love Russian culture. I do not like Putin in any way, but that's a whole other thing. But he was born in Russia. I moved to America when he was very young. His family moved to America. They had a candy shop, I think they were saying, in Philadelphia. And in that candy shop, they sold pulp magazines for science fiction and adventure. And apparently that's where he just started reading it and fell in love with it, was from his dad's candy shop. So he wrote a bunch of science fiction, then he started writing other things, and then as it got later in his life, I came across this really sad stuff. He died in, I think, like 96 or something, 97. I can't remember exactly when. But he had a heart attack. No, in 92. He died in 92. He was born in 1920. They don't know his birth date. That wasn't documented, but he celebrated his birth date on January 2nd. But he was born in 1920 and he died in 1992. He had a heart attack in 1983, and they took him in for triple bypass surgery, and he got AIDS from a blood transfusion, which is just crazy. So that was really sad and weird. But for me, this is just so everybody's aware, I am not the biggest Isaac Asimov fan. I thought of this weird analogy that might kind of help to describe how I feel about him as a science fiction writer. I love robots, like I was saying, and about 15 or 20, maybe it's been 20 years now, about 20 years ago, we got a robot dog. This little plastic dog. It could walk, it could move around, it could sit back, it could shake, all kinds of things. I even think it could start to go upstairs, I think. It was pretty amazing physically. We turned it on, and it was barking, kind of moving around, and we were like, oh, that's so cool. And I petted it for a second, and then it laid down, and it cried. And we were like, oh, what's wrong? So I bent down, and I petted it, and it jumped up, and it had fun for a second. And then it laid down and cried. And we played with it for like an hour, and all it would do is lay down and cry. It was a mess. Like, it was the worst dog ever. We didn't end up keeping it. And I kind of realized that the company, and I'm assuming all of this, of course, the company had hired a bunch of geniuses to build this dog. And it was genius. I mean, the fact that it could walk around alone is pretty incredible, right? It's a robot that I can buy on a meager salary that can walk around. That's pretty good, you know? So they've got these geniuses designing this really kind of brilliant piece of technology, but they didn't have anyone in the room who was stupid. for lack of a better way to say it, right? They needed an idiot in the room. They needed somebody in the room who could say, that's not a dog. What do dogs do? You know? Like if you got a dog, if you get a dog and you bring it home and you start to play with it, what's it going to do? It's going to run around, it's going to chew on things, it's going to pee on things, right? It's going to be a dog. Like literally, when we turned it on, the first thing it probably should have done, which would have been amazing, is it should have walked over to a wall or a corner and it should have put its leg up like it's going to pee on something. Now, I'm not suggesting that it should shoot liquid out, of course, right? It's a robot. There's a reason you get a robot dog instead of a real dog. But it should do things that real dogs would do. I would have told that story forever if that happened, right? That would have been incredible. When you're watching TV, all of a sudden you should hear a weird noise from the kitchen. Anyone who owns an animal knows that when you're sitting and watching TV and you hear something in the kitchen, you need to go find out what's going on, right? Of course, it should do that. It should be a dog, right? It should be playful and it should be fun. It should put things in its mouth. You know, it should walk out of a room with a piece of clothing in its mouth, right? Like it's been tearing stuff up in your closet. It should unroll the toilet paper so it makes a pile on the floor. I think that this company created a genius robot dog, but left out the dog part because they were too smart. And to me, I feel like that's kind of Isaac Asimov in science fiction. Isaac Asimov has incredible ideas that have influenced everything. His ideas are amazing, but the stories themselves I don't think last the way other writers' stories last. And Robbie's a great story. It's probably the best story in this book, to be perfectly honest. Spoiler warning. By the way, I should say that for everything. I'm going to talk about so much weird junk that comes to my brain while we're doing this. I'm going to spoil everything. So just beware, okay? Spoilers. Yeah, so that's kind of my opinion on Isaac Asimov. I really respect him. I think he's a genius. I just wish that he had a little more human intuition. I don't know really how to put it, but he's just very smart. He's a very smart writer. So let's talk about the story, finally. So Robbie, published in 1940, is the story of a young girl and the nursemaid robot. They call it a nursemaid. It's a boy. The nursemaid robot that takes care of this little girl. And it opens with them outside. They're playing hide and go seek, and they're running around. She's on the robot's back, and he's charging around. And then he's very agile, right? There's no way that child is going to get hurt. But they do some stuff, like he picks her up on his back, puts her on the ground, right? That it would look scary to watch, but there's no way the kid would ever get hurt because the robot is designed to be able to move in such a way, to be able to be careful, and to know that you never harm humans. And I think that's one brilliant thing that I do want to bring up right off the bat for Isaac Asimov's genius, is the idea that a computer cannot do something that you don't tell it to do. That is not how computers work. And I don't know, back in 1940 or maybe 41, whenever he wrote Runaround, I don't know how many people truly understood that a computer literally only does exactly what you told it to do. It can't do anything else. It's not possible, right? It can stop working, right? You may not say, please don't work anymore, right? That can happen. It can break down. But it won't do something that you don't tell it to do. And I think the creation of these three laws was an excellent way for Asimov to kind of educate the general community about the fact that if your robot is not programmed to do something, it's not going to do it. There's literally a part where the wife in this book says, "What if the robot hurts her?" And the husband explains to her that the chances of the robot hurting her are smaller than the chances of either of us hurting her. We would go insane and hurt her before the robot would. Right? Which is an excellent point. And I don't know how many people really understood that. So that's the three laws are probably Asimov's biggest contribution. And it goes way beyond just how we think of robots, right? Because we don't really think of robots that much, to be honest. But it ties to computers. It ties to all electronics. Our surroundings can only do to us what we have taught them to do when it comes to electronics and things. And it's amazing. That's incredible. But they're playing out in the yard, and then the mom starts looking for the kid. And this is the first part that I have a problem with in this story. Robbie doesn't talk, by the way. I want to make that very clear. That Robbie is a silent robot. The mom starts looking for the kid. She's yelling, "Hey, hey, where are you? Time for dinner. Come on in, come on in." And she slowly gets more and more angry, right? And then finally, she finds them, and she's super mad. She takes him in the house, and she says Robbie should go to his room. And the little girl's like, no, please let him stay here. Just please let him sit here. And she says, fine, stay in the corner, but be quiet. And it bothered me that the robot would be ultimately protective of the child, but not say, time to go. Your mother's calling us, right? Not hear it, not respond to it. And I can understand that a robot, you could argue that the robot hears just as well as the human. My question would be, why? That's insanity, right? If you're going to have a robot protect a child, you're going to have it move faster than humans, you're going to have it see better than humans, and you're going to have it hear better than humans. And Robbie does move faster and see better. But for some reason, Robbie can't hear, and I didn't like that at all. But they don't hear it, they get in trouble, and the mom gets super mad, and she starts nagging the husband that they need to get rid of the robot. Now, there's a lot of philosophy in this, which I like, but I don't like, and as we've said in the past, all of these stories have to be taken within their time. This was published in 1940. This is old, right? This could be the oldest thing that I've done on the channel. I think Chris might have done older, but this could be the oldest thing I've done. But 1940, right? And this husband and wife are painted in this very sort of not great way. The wife is just this weird nag who's continuously wrong. And the husband tries to put her in her place, but he really loves her. So, it's not good, right? Society has changed. Times have changed. That doesn't mean there's not great things in this story, but it does mean that you got to get through that crap to get to the real meat of the story. So, the nagging wife brings up all this stuff, like unions don't like robots. Right? Which is very interesting and very true. Okay. Now, there is a lot of talk, even in this book, and this may have been added in 1950. I'm not sure. There was a whole list of stuff. But they talk about how if robots take some human jobs, that will create different jobs for humans. right? Because the robots have to be maintained and they have to be created, they have to be designed. There'll be a whole other industry that will unfold. Now, of course, the problem you kind of run into is education levels, right? There are certain jobs that anybody can do, and certain jobs that only a specific few can do. And that's probably based on how wealthy their family is, which really sucks, but it's true, right? And that's only certain jobs, right? I got a buddy worked in construction his whole life. The dude's well over a millionaire. He's doing government contracts, insanely successful, genius level construction worker, right? So it's only a few types of jobs that are really reliant on a heavy education, but those few jobs may increase if robots start taking other jobs. So that's an interesting philosophical point that's being brought up in here, right? Labor unions do not like robots because they take people's jobs. But she also talks about how the community looks at her weird, and how there's a law that no robots can be outside after dark, right? Just this weird paranoid prejudice. And I believe that the reason he put it in here, so when he read iRobot, he thought, I want to write a story about a sympathetic robot. Because all of the stories from before this time, not before his story, but from before this time, were basically Frankenstein, where somebody builds a robot, they feel like they're God, they let the robot free, and it kills them, right? That's the generic robot story until we start getting to iRobot by Otto, and then, of course, Robbie, where people are starting to write sympathetic robot stories. So I believe he felt that if the robots are persecuted, are treated like secondhand citizens, then we would feel more for them. So I think he's just trying to increase the heart by coming up with these weird prejudices against the robots. And the wife is very prejudiced against the robot. She cannot stand him. So she starts nagging her husband day after day, and finally he breaks down and says, fine, we'll get rid of the stupid robot. Oh, one other reason that they wanted to get rid of the robot, that she wanted to get rid of the robot, is the only thing that her daughter was playing with was the robot. She would not play with other children. And to me, that is an incredibly valid point, right? This household is it's not a happy household, right? They've worked themselves into this weird little hell where the wife is not receiving enough attention and enough say in the situation, that the only way she can feel like she's a part of anything is to just constantly nag at this husband who knows everything, and beat him down to the point that he has to lovingly give in and do what his wife says. You know what I mean? It's a really unstable, bad situation that they're in. And if it were more balanced, I believe they probably could have sit down and talked about the fact that their child needs to hang out with other children as well. And they could find ways that they could have Robbie and they could have other kids around, you know. I think that the relationship in this book couldn't be balanced, because if it was, there really wouldn't be a problem. And that's a freaky thing. If I was going to try to talk about a theme of this story, I think the theme is women. right? Isaac Asimov's view of women. I kind of think it boils down to that, but I'm on another complete side thing. So, anyways, he gets worn down. He just says, yes, we're going to get rid of the robot. So they go get a dog. While the girl's away, I can't remember where they send her. Oh, the dad and her go to the movies. The dad and her go to the movies. The mom runs out and grabs a dog and gets rid of the robot. They sell it back to the company. The dad works for the robot company, I believe. So they have kind of an in there. It's a very, very wealthy family. So she goes and gets a dog. They come back to the movies, and she's like, oh my gosh, a dog. I love dogs. I got to tell Robbie about this dog. And she goes running around looking for Robbie. She can't find him. And then she starts to realize that Robbie's not there. And the mom's like, it's okay, it's okay. He ran away. That's what she says. We don't know where he went. We can't find him. He's gone. And the girl is just devastated. Of course, she wants Robbie. She literally ends up losing weight. Months go by, and she's just not the same person. So, after a bunch more fighting and nagging, the mother decides what they need to do is go live in the city for a month. So they're going to get a home in New York, and they're going to get servants to take care of this house, and they'll live in New York for a month so that the little girl can forget about her robot. And the mom tells her about the trip, and she does seem kind of excited. She actually starts eating again. She seems a little more playful and a little more happy. She helps them get packed for the trip when the time comes. They fly to New York. There's a weird little part where they talk about the fact that the dad's mad that they can't take his car to New York, but his car only has 2 seats and no room for luggage. Which is like, what the hell are you doing? You know what I mean? Where's your minivan, pal? You know, seriously. Where's your Ford with 4 doors? What are you doing, man? So, anyways, they take a taxi. They go off to New York. And on the flight, they don't take a taxi to New York. They take a taxi to the airport, and they get into a flying ship. And Isaac Asimov goes into great detail about the little girl looking down until all the land turns into little squares when you're looking out the window, and how she notices that her breath left a mark on the window when she pulls away, and how exciting it is to be above the clouds instead of below the clouds, right? All kinds of cool stuff. It's not science fiction by any means. It's all very standard for us. But, once again, back in 1940... there probably were a lot more people who had never been on an airplane. So it's kind of cool, right? I can respect that, I guess. But the girl finally bursts out while they're on the flight. She says, I know why we're going to New York. And I'm so thankful that you're taking me there. I know that we're going to find Robbie. And the parents are like, oh my God, the dad spits his water everywhere. And they say, well, maybe so. And then they land in New York, and they start doing all kinds of touristy things. Like, they are packing her every minute full. And she's having fun. She's doing things. But the whole time, every robot she sees, she is looking for Robbie everywhere. And finally, they end up going to this museum. I think it's a museum. And the little girl notices that there's an exhibit for a talking robot. And she's like, oh my gosh, I have to go to that. But she knows that her mom will flip out if she brings up going to see the robot. So she just keeps it quiet. And then when her mom doesn't notice, she runs off to that robot exhibit. Now, in that exhibit, and this is interesting, Asimov brings up in the introduction, he says, that's when the first talking robot was invented. And then he says it was completely useless. There was no point in it. And it was just destined for the mining operation on Mercury. Now, I'm not sure. I believe that Isaac Asimov is associating speaking with intelligent thought. So this talking robot that she goes and talks to, it answers questions. Like you can say, what's pi to 20 digits? Or what's the atomic weight of this element? Or how many miles is it to blah, blah? You know what I mean? It's pretty literally chat GBT. Like anything you want to know, it can tell you as long as it's a factual thing. And I think that, I mean, like literally, the ability to talk, right? For anything to make a sound, a speaker to make a sound is old technology, right? That's before Robbie was written. Things already could talk. So the fact that he's doing this leads me to believe that what he meant was artificial intelligence. That you could talk to this thing. Now, the reason I say that is because us getting to Mercury and creating a mine and then building robots that can go into that mine, grab some stuff and bring it back out to us is intense, right? That's way in the future. That has not happened yet at all. But things being able to talk is super old. Like that's nothing. It's literally nothing. So that's why I think this is kind of an AI thing. And I believe he specifically gets into artificial intelligence later in the book. We'll see, but I really think it's in here. I just don't know what his obsession was with talking. I'm not sure. I know that he wanted to have the question and answer section. So anyways, she goes up to the exhibit, finds the robot, and she says, "Where is Robbie?" And the robot says, "What's Robbie?" And she says, "It's a robot, just like you." And then Isaac Asimov goes into this kind of description of a robot trying to realize that there are other robots and that it's part of this category of robots. And literally, as the questions go on, the robot starts blowing fuses because it can't comprehend all of the stuff she's talking about. I literally believe he's just talking about a machine that was on the brink of being able to think, or was able to think, but only in a small amount at a time. Because the way it's explained is a person runs in the room and says, "Who let you in here? You're not supposed to be in here without somebody else." And literally, people have to whisper the question to the tour guide. And if the tour guide thinks the robot would know the answer, then the tour guide asks the question to the robot so that it doesn't blow a fuse when it starts to get too existential, you know, when it starts to get too existential. So I thought that was pretty cool. I think that's really interesting. I don't know why he put so much emphasis on talking, but that's an interesting robot that he created there. So, the mom comes in, finds her, in her shrill voice, she says, "Where have you been? I'm so mad at you. Don't you know how worried I was?" Right? Yells at her and berates her. They have a terrible night. They go home. The husband leaves, doesn't come home for like 6 hours. And then the next morning, he says to his wife, "I have a really good idea." And she says, "Well, you might as well tell me, because none of the ideas I'm trying are working." And he says, "Okay, I think we should take her to a robot factory." And she says, "Why?" And he says, "Because if we show her that robots aren't alive, she'll stop caring about Robbie." And the wife is like, "Wow, that is a good idea." And of course the dad's like, "That's all I have is good ideas." Right? So they pile up, and that's where he was the night before when he went out. He went to a robot factory and arranged a tour for the next day. So the family goes the next morning. They go to the robot factory. The mom is super excited. Normally she'd be bored stiff, apparently, but not today, because today she cures her daughter. So she is asking all kinds of robotic questions, asking the guy to rephrase that so that a young person could understand. And it's the best tour the guy's ever given because he feels like somebody actually cares about what he's talking about, right? And finally, they make it to the robot floor where robots are building robots. And unions come up again here. The guy says, of course, the unions won't allow us to have robots building robots all the time. We can only do it every once in a while. So they look around, they're seeing robots building robots, and the little girl's all disheartened. And then she looks way over in the corner, and amongst the robots that are working over there, she sees Robbie working. And she yells, "Robbie!" and jumps over the railing onto the construction floor and is heading towards Robbie. The parents and the tour guide flip out because it's very dangerous on the floor. There's literally a huge tractor going right for her, and she's not noticing it. She is going to get hit and killed. The dad freaks out, jumps over the railing after her, but he's way too slow. Robbie hears her, whips around, sees that she's in danger, jumps, grabs her, and jumps out of the way of the tractor. Saves her life. So now the wife realizes that the dad set up Robbie being here. And she's super mad. She's like, "You planned all of this?" And he's like, "How could I know that she almost would get killed? I didn't know she'd jump over the railing." And then he says, "But Robbie did save her life. She needs Robbie to protect her." And the wife is like, "Well, I guess you're right. I guess he'll be with us till he rusts." And then that's the end. Now, the Asimov in the 1950 version tacked on a tiny ending that segues into Runaround, right? So there's a tiny bit more in this book, but that's the original ending of the story. I did read the intro to Runaround. It's talking about two scientists that really saved their butts when they were trying to start the mining community on Mercury. These scientists were good with robots, and that'll be the next story that we'll read. But this story, to me, this is kind of the best story in the book. I've got to say, the story is pretty bland and weird up until she sees Robbie. Something happens there where it turns into an actual story. And I know that's a really bizarre thing to say, because this guy's a good storyteller, right? I mean, give me a break. It's Isaac Asimov. He's fine. I think the trouble with him is I think he assumes his audience is stupid. He is a teacher. He taught in Boston for years and years. I didn't mention that. He taught biochemistry at the University of Boston or something like that for years and years. He's a teacher, right? He's not writing stories. He's writing lessons. All of the way those parents were acting, all of that stuff, the way unions were reacting, the way that the other people in the community were reacting to Robbie, all that stuff is a lesson. I feel like that with the Foundation series, right? His ideas are great. Like there's this great, a horrible fear for most Americans, or what used to be a horrible fear for most Americans, is the idea that we would have the same person in charge for our entire lives. Because that would be horrible. It'd be like having a king, right? We don't want a king. We didn't want a king. That's why everything happened the way it did, right? Now, unfortunately, we're sort of shifting gears. Trump, it seems like, would like to be in power longer than the people want him to be in power. Unfortunately, only a very small percentage of the community of America agrees with that. Luckily, it's only a small percentage, because that's not a direction most people want to go in, luckily. But he creates the idea that the emperor clones themselves, and they have the same person for generation after generation after generation, right? Which is terrifying to have no growth, to not be able to learn from the past, to not be able to just change your mind, you know? That's horrifying to most Americans. So I think that's a brilliant idea that he's got in this really crazy story about this super genius guy who knows the future and says this is what's going to happen, gets a bunch of people together, they all go on this, they join this cult, they all go together and they make this future happen, and it all crumbles and none of it works. But then you realize that he knew that too. He built it so that it would crumble, so that this would happen, right? And you sort of get this weird idea that he thinks you're dumb, that he's not showing you this crazy weird thing that he thought of. He's teaching you how life works. And it's not the funnest type of thing to read, you know? Like we have things like Rick and Morty, right? I'm not a big Rick and Morty fan. It's too kind of gory and dirty for me. But that show assumes that you're very smart. And I think that's the reason it's so successful, honestly. You know, it's not the fart jokes. There's plenty of shows that have stupid fart jokes. It's the fact that it deals with science and science fiction in a way that doesn't try to explain it to you. You just sit back and go, multi universes. Wow, that's interesting. And the plots are so complex that the basic scientific ideas like cloning or multi universes or whatever, the basic scientific ideas that they're putting forth seem more complex because the plots are so crazy, right? So you can watch it and go, I am smart. I understand this idea about cloning, and then that clone made that clone, and then there was suddenly 10 of them, and where should they live? And you know what I mean? There's a way to tell stories to make your audience excited. Like, I feel like if I were to write something, the best thing I could hear somebody say is, I knew it, right? If somebody is so excited that they were on the same level as you went, I think that's the ultimate peak of storytelling. If they're ahead of you, it's terrible, because then they're just waiting for you to get to the point. And if they're behind you, it's terrible, because then they just don't understand what the hell's going on. Why are they reading this? You know what I mean? They've got to be right on the same level with you. And that's super hard, right? It's not his fault. That's a super, super tough thing to do. So, I like this story. I like this book. Right? It's okay. It's not the greatest thing ever. It's all right. Let's rank this thing with our little scale. So, for heart, I'm going to say I believe this is the most heart Isaac Asimov ever had. Wanting to make this sympathetic robot, and the luck that he stumbled into in the action sequence of the robot saving this little girl's life once she finally finds him. That combination just creates a 2-page moment in this little story that is insanely good. Really good. It's too bad all the circumstances that came before it were so shaky to get us here, because here is great. You know, if Robbie truly had gotten lost, that would have been much better, right? If the parents both wanted Robbie back, if the whole community wanted Robbie back, you know, seriously. But for heart, I'm going to give this a 7. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. And I think that's the best heart he will ever get, right? So 7 out of 10 for heart. For science, 10. I mean, there's nothing you can say, right? It's Isaac Asimov. He's going to get a 10 every single time. He's a pure genius at science, right? It's cool stuff. He talks a little bit about the way the robot looks, about the way it moves. He talks about that robot trying to answer questions and then his circuits are blowing. Interesting, crazy stuff, especially for 1940. I mean, that means he was writing it in 39, you know? Like, seriously. That's cool stuff. Cool stuff. Philosophy, kind of interesting. They talk about unions a little bit. They talk about more jobs being created rather than less jobs being created. What would it mean for a society to slowly start utilizing robots? Would the neighbors think they're cool, like a new car? Or would they be afraid of them? Or would politicians grab onto it, which of course they would, right? Would they become the devil? Or, right? I mean, interesting philosophical questions in this thing. So I'm going to go for probably a 9 for that. I think that's very cool and interesting. So we've got what? 7, 10, 9, and then mystery. So for this story, I have to say mystery's a 0. Right? There's no fascination about what's possible. I think Isaac Asimov, and I'm not trying to just diss on him. I really respect him, right? I just think he kind of felt like he already knew everything. So, which he probably did, right? Super dang smart. So I don't know how much mystery he will ever convey because he's just telling it to you, right? So I'm probably going to say like, let's go with 3 for mystery. We'll give it a number. We'll just give it low. And that way we've got 7 and 3. So we've got 10 and then we've got 10 and 9. So 29 out of the 40. So that's pretty good, right? This story I probably would give an overall 7. I think it's okay. It's a bit dated, right? But what do you expect for something that's, 80 years old now, right? It's dated. It's old. But yeah, it's pretty good. I really enjoyed it. I hope that you guys can start reading along with this as well. Of course, we're going to do more Star Trek and more Philip K. Dick. Those are the next 2 coming up. But I wanted to do this one because it's fun to shift gears a little bit. This is a fun one. I know I rambled a lot. But that was a lot to talk about, right? To introduce somebody like Isaac Asimov. That's big. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the like button. If you want to see more stuff like this, check out the channel. Absolutely. Check out our homepage. We got tons of stuff. And subscribe because there'll be tons more coming as well, and you'll want to be notified about it. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.